to monitor from different points. The strike led by the PSA, the Public Servants Association. We can talk more about that wage dispute with government with Andrew Goldberg, who's a labour lawyer with us in studio today. Andrew, welcome. First things first, from what we know so far, I mean, the workers are saying they want 6.5%. Government says, well, we can afford 3% with some sweeteners, and it's going to be implemented unilaterally by government. Where does that leave both parties?
Well, they're actually going to implement it come this week. This is the week that they're going to implement it. So the only resort that the unions have got is to strike. And the company obviously can lock them out and do the lockout. But the go slow that they're talking about during lunchtime, during the office hours, that's actually a strike itself.
And how effective do you think is this course of action by the unions? I mean, today, only the PSA had permission to strike. Other workers are saying, well, we're taking part in these lunchtime pickets. But in terms of a pressure campaign, will this be effective?
I don't believe so because, it's only 230,000 workers. It is a lot of workers, but they don't really have the support of the other workers, and only a national strike would be able to, in terms of Section 77 of the Labour Relations Act, be effective.
And legally, let's talk about what's going to happen this week. If you are on strike, you and your employer have fallen out in the way in which government and the public sector have done now. One saying we want 3%, the other saying, well, government says we can pay you 3%. The other say, well, actually, double that, and then we can talk. In a situation where the employer is saying, as government has done, that we're going to implement our offer anyway, how does it work legally?
Well, legally, they can implement it unilaterally. Obviously, the employer has the right to do so, but there would have to be the union would call for talks at the bargaining council. The government's got their own bargaining council, which they would go to, and they would have to go there within a period of time, and they'd have to negotiate with them at the bargaining council. A senior commissioner would be appointed, or arbitrator, and would deal with it there at the bargaining council.
And at what point do we say, actually, before the strike action happens, yes, the talks are at such a point where they failed to an extent where let's allow the PSA to demonstrate in the way in which it's done today?
Well, it has demonstrated. I mean, in 28th of last month, they announced that they were going to strike, and they then gave 7 days' notice of the strike. So we were within the time of that 7-day period, and they have got the right to strike once the 7 days is up.
And they're talking about intensifying their action as well. They've had today the mass action once off nationally, but we're seeing, as we've just done, that lunchtime pickets are also going on throughout this period. What recourse do they have? Do they now that they've got the certificate, have the right to strike as and when they please nationally?
Well, the PSA does. Members of the PSA do, but the rest of the unions, they don't. So if you want to do a secondary strike, which they're looking for, the whole country to go into strike, and all the workers to strike in support of them, there's no support in that regard, and they'd have to go and get a secondary strike, the right to strike in terms of Section 77, as I said.
And let's go back to that, because this is a collective bargaining setup, right? All unions agree that they want workers to be paid more, yet only one has been granted a certificate to go ahead with this form of industrial action. Break it down for those of us who've never been in these processes to understand how you can all be demanding the same thing or similar things, yet one of you is allowed to protest.
Well, COSATU hasn't really called for a strike. They've said they wanted 10%, but they haven't really called for a strike in that regard. They're still sticking with their guns of the 10%, whereas the PSA has looked at 6.5%, but they have looked at a strike notice and proceeding with a strike. It is the time for strikes. I mean, you can strike on this issue at this time. And so they have done it correctly to the PSA, but they just don't have the support of COSATU. So without the support of COSATU, the main union in the country, they need that support in order to be able to really force government to listen to their demands. But at the moment now, go-slows and the like will, by COSATU people, will actually cause the government quite a lot of grief.
There is also the technical challenges then out for public sector unions that many of their members, in fact, are unable to go on strike because they are essential service workers, and under that category, you can't simply walk off the job.
Exactly. I mean, firefighters, people that are in police and the police force, SAPS, can't go and strike at all. They have to be at work from 8 to 5 in their desks. They can't go and strike all their essential services, especially the police force. We need them, and they can't go and strike.
Do you think both sides have worked themselves into a corner here?
I think there's a lot of tension amongst the employees and a lot of tension amongst government, but government is standing by their offer and they're not saying anything. I mean, government has been totally quiet in this regard.
South Africa's got a long history of strikes, as we see, but when you look at the worsening socio-economic situation, the cost of living crisis, impacted or caused by not only the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has pushed up gas, oil prices, domestic issues as well. How much worse do you think this is going to get?
Well, I think the economy is in for, next year especially, people are predicting the economy to slide a lot. I mean, it's probably looking at a depression next year. I mean, I'm not one who knows about these things, but that's what I've heard, you know. And it's the economy, especially South African economy, is dependent on the Western countries to supply it with all the needs that it does. And it's a very dependent country. So, I mean, in that regard, you are looking at having issues, especially, you know, at this period of the time of the year when people are looking and going on leave and people are looking at closing down businesses. And we can't afford as a country to offer more than 3%. As far as I'm concerned, the government's figure of 3% might be low, but it might be reasonable in their terms, in their sphere, in their...
So what then can be done, given the tough times all round, to make sure that a compromise is reached?
Well, the union needs to strike and needs to stick to their guns and needs to, you know, get all the unions involved, get COSATU involved, and then definitely the government will be forced to listen to their demands. And the government has in the past listened to their demands. You know, the last major strike we had in this regard was 2010. So the government's been, you know, listening to the demands and applying, and the gratuity's only been a recent thing. So now that they want to stop the gratuity, they've got problems.
And I'm glad you mentioned the issue of the gratuity, because it's one of the sweeteners, is it not, to the 3% salary deal. How effective are such incentives in getting workers to accept an offer from an employer, not only government, but more generally when, yes, it's not, let's say, a 6.5% increase, but it comes with bells and whistles?
It's definitely effective. I mean, employees love the incentives and love this thing because then they don't have to give a percentage of that back to, you know, UIF and the like, because it still is taxable. But yes, it's more, doesn't have to go to Provident Fund, it doesn't have to go to medical aid, and definitely the sweetener like that is effective. But it's only an interim thing, it's only a temporary thing. They can't continue it indefinitely.
And the unions are saying they want that, in fact, extended, not because under the current deal from government, by mid-2023, it would all be gone. But is it affordable?
Well, I wouldn't know. That would be up to the government and the economy. But as far as I can see, the economy is really backing at this stage. As far as, you know, even us as lawyers are really, you know, battling at this stage.
Andrew Goldberg, good to speak to you about law and finance. Thank you so much for coming in today.